Welcome to a program of the Dallas Bar Association Public Forum Committee. The committee's mission is to educate the bar and the community on vital issues that impact the public at large through forums, debates, speaking engagements, and discussions. In November 2024, Dallas voters approved two city charter amendments. In a nutshell, and much more to come on this subject. The amendments, one, provided for more police officers and police funding, and two, provided for the city's waiver of its sovereign immunity to liability and lawsuits. Our guests, our panelists today are Mike Rawlings, former mayor of the city of Dallas from 2011 to 2019, and Will Altabef, an attorney at Gibson, Dunn, and who formerly clerked for the Honorable Patrick Higginbotham of the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. Views expressed today are those of the individuals, not of their firms, nor of the Dallas Bar Association. There is CLE today for this course. I will provide that, or our friend who's on the call with us, Araceli Rodriguez from the Bar Association, will help provide that, and we'll place that at the end of the program, and it'll be in the chat. We hope to leave time for questions, and with that, we'll begin the substance. Will, a recent headline stated, Attorney General Paxton sues Dallas officials over police staffing charter amendment. Can you take us through that, please?
Sure. Thank you, Russ. Thank you for that introduction. So I think that suit is why this is a perfect time to be talking about these amendments. And so I'm gonna take us kind of some background on the legal perspective. First, on the process of a charter amendment, a little bit about more detail on what these charter amendments do. And then finally, we'll get a little bit into the detail of that suit from the Attorney General, who's suing who and what's really at stake here and how that has potential implications for the charter amendments in practice going forward. So first in the process for how does a charter amendment become law, the old Schoolhouse Rock. So in Texas, a charter amendment starts out as a petition, and it needs the signatures of at least 20,000 qualified voters or 5% of the qualified voters in a city, whichever number is smaller. Once you get that petition signed, all the signatures, it goes to the city's governing body, the city council, to put it to an election for voter approval. Assuming the proposition gets voter approval, then it goes back to the city council to canvass the vote, which is, they will review the results of the election and declare it valid. And it will go into law then. So then here for these Dallas kind of hero amendments, there were initially three of them, as you alluded to. Proposition S, which relates to standing and immunity. Proposition T, which was a charter amendment focused on the city manager's performance and potential kind of a bonus or dismissal scheme, depending on performance evaluation. And then Proposition U, which is about the spending of excess revenue towards public safety matters, as we also alluded to. So Propositions S and U, which I'll talk more about in just a second, did pass. Proposition T did not pass. So that was the November 5th, 2024 election. And so after that, city council canvassed the vote, and those S and U went into effect. So let's get a little more focus on what the actual enacted charter amendments involve. So we'll start with Proposition S. This is really a kind of a legalistic charter amendment, and it has three core components. The first was that Proposition S gives standing to Dallas residents to bring lawsuits against the city where the city is not in compliance with the city's charter or any city ordinance or Texas state law. So, again, providing standing specifically to Dallas residents to bring lawsuits against the city. Second, the second component is the relief that it enables residents to seek is declaratory or injunctive relief. So this is not, monetary damages. However, residents can get their attorney's fees recovered. So that's kind of the one instance in which this has a cash component, but generally not monetary damages, more about injunctive relief. And finally, Proposition S says it waives the city's immunity to suits where liability arises out of the charter, a city ordinance, or state law, kind of paralleling that first element that I discussed above. So again, that is kind of a legal mechanic change to the city charter. Proposition U, a little less of a legal mechanic and more of kind of an economic, practical change. It has requirements for the city to spend excess revenue towards certain public safety goals, hiring of police officers and their compensation. It also creates obligations for the city to conduct a survey of neighboring municipalities to evaluate their compensation of police officers and then use that as kind of a benchmark for Dallas's compensation structure. Something I'm sure you and Mike can get a little more into the detail of how that works in practice. But so that's Proposition S and U, the two enacted charter amendments. And now let's go back to the lawsuit. So those two charter amendments are really at the core of this lawsuit. In terms of who is suing whom, the plaintiffs here, it's the state of Texas through the Attorney General's office, as you referenced, and two Dallas residents. And so going back to that Proposition S, so giving standing, if the Attorney General of the state of Texas is knocked out from the lawsuit under a theory, one of the theories here, those two Dallas residents could kind of become the key plaintiffs to keep this going forward. It's almost two avenues here that we'll get into. And the defendants then is the city of Dallas, and then the city manager and the city's CFO, both of those in the CFO and city manager in their official capacities, not as individuals. And the kind of the core allegation, what wrong did the city and the city manager and the city CFO do here? The state and the two resident plaintiffs are saying, the city has failed to comply with the obligations of Proposition U. They are not calculating excess revenues correctly. They're not calculating excess revenues correctly, and they haven't completed the survey that they needed to. And in terms of the relief sought, the city and the plaintiffs are seeking that injunctive relief. They're seeking an order from the court for the city to comply with the obligations of Proposition U. So again, not monetary damages. And there's kind of two theories here of how this lawsuit is proceeding. The resident plaintiffs, the two individuals, they're advancing the theory, Proposition S gives us standing and it waives the city's immunity. So that's why we can bring this suit forward. And the Attorney General's kind of position, it's all in one complaint, but there's kind of two avenues to keep track of here, is that this is an ultra vires case, so Latin for beyond the authority. And the Attorney General saying, the city manager and the CFO of the city don't have the authority to not comply with the charter, and therefore the state is bringing this suit to force them to comply. And in that ultra vires claim, the city doesn't get to claim that it has immunity in that type of lawsuit. And so that lawsuit was filed in February, so relatively recent. And then just last week, the city filed its answer. So a very recent development, and the defendants here kind of raised what you would expect. The big kind of crux of their answer is on jurisdictional matter. So, court, you don't even need to get to the merits of, compliance with Prop U yet. The real focus here is on, whether or not this lawsuit can even be heard. And so the first kind of element of their defense is that, Texas law doesn't give municipalities the power to create standing. That needs to come from the state legislature, from state law. So here, standing is, purportedly created by a charter amendment, by Proposition S. And so the defendants say, no, we, through the charter, can't create standing. That would need to come through the legislature. So there is no standing for these Dallas residents. The second kind of element of their defense is, the plaintiffs here don't actually have a particularized harm. This is just kind of general grievances. In the states and the resident plaintiffs complaint, the state says, well, because Dallas isn't meeting its obligations under Proposition U to hire more police officers and compensate them, the state will have to step in, and the state will be forced to take on more expense to ensure public safety where the city is, and that's in their complaint. And then the last element of the kind of defense's response here is that the Attorney General can sue a municipality when the municipality is violating state laws, but there's no law out there that gives the Attorney General the ability to sue the city to enforce the city's law, the city charter. So, again, Proposition S, if it's valid, says that the Dallas residents can sue to enforce the city charter and city ordinance, but that doesn't give standing to the Attorney General, and they're saying you point to the state law that says the Attorney General has this. So this is really an interesting case. I think it's going to be covered going forward, and I think the jurisdiction, elements that the city is raising in their answer will kind of be the kind of initial show. A big question as to what the broader implications of if Proposition S falls on jurisdictional matters. If a court says, it's not enforceable, you can't grant standing, you can't, a city's charter can't waive immunity that has to come from the state, then I think this case will that'll be what it's remembered for. If it goes over the jurisdictional hurdles and gets more to the merits of whether the city was complying or not, I think there's a whole nother thicket of issues that will have to be kind of sorted through of what would a court order or even a settlement look like here. Of a court wouldn't want to be necessarily involved in the legislative executive function of a city. They're not necessarily going to want to be making determinations of how the city budgets. So is the requirements Proposition U, is that really ministerial, where a court can just say, oh, this is exactly what you had to do, it's very clear? Or is there some amount of discretion involved, where the city manager, there's the language of Prop U, but the actual implementation may be, there's some executive interpretation there, where a court probably won't want to get so into that, determining whether or not that's been complied with. So I think the jurisdiction will be important here in the kind of the Act 1. And then if there is a second act, I think it'll be very complicated as to how relief is kind of sorted.
Super. Will, thank you very much. Anything more?
Yeah.
Please go ahead. Sorry, didn't mean
No. I think that's all I wanted to say to kind of set the legal background here. And I'll turn it over to you and Mike to kind of go through some of the more political and practical implications.
Well, thanks again, Will. That was very helpful. And I think the people who, signed the petition and voted for this really were just all about public safety. And of course, now here we are just talking about a lawsuit and the intricacies of, jurisdictional this and that. So I guess at this point, I'd like to ask Mike to, if he would, just to talk about sort of the background of how we got to get here and the policy implications and things like that.
Thanks, Russ. First of all, I don't know if I can be as smart as Will. That was impressive. So I'm gonna sit up straight and try. Look, like everything in life, there's several levels working here, and I think on the surface, this raises the question about how do the citizens of Dallas or the citizens of any Texas city want to govern. It has historically been a representative government. We elect officials and they go do their thing. And the question is, do we want to jump around the council and the mayor and do our own thing when we're not in alignment with how the council is working? I think that it was the case in this place. I think there are a lot of people that felt that the city was off base and not dealing with the issues that needed to be dealt with. Okay. And so there was a lot of appetite for that. We'll get into the vote itself and what happened in the vote secondarily, but that's the broad issue that was working. At the second level, there's the issue of state versus city, okay? And there is no question a move afoot for the state to say the cities need to be in line with what we want to do as a state. And there are committees being set up all the time in the legislature to pass laws that get the cities in compliance. So there's a dialectic going on here between cities and state, and I think this lawsuit by Attorney General Paxton is a good example of that. And it's like, hey, they passed this, you need to stick to the letter of the law. I think that's gonna be in the hands of the court. Okay, there's nothing we can do. I think Will kind of explained pretty well, what the arguments for and against are. To me, the life's confusing, and I just kind of say, what can I do to make life better? And it's like, focus on my backyard. How can I create a better neighborhood, a better city? And so I kind of am more focused on the first thing and say, what is the right way to approach issues at this city? I was not a supporter of this, okay, and brought a campaign up against S, T, and U. T was an interesting one. We didn't talk, Will didn't talk about it briefly. It was really to do a public survey of the performance of the city manager, and if this survey, she did not or he did not hit certain levels, could be terminated. And the citizens rejected that. And so I think most of the issue, you said it, and I think it's fair point, is that people want crime to be down, and they want to be in a safe place. Whenever you tell people that you can have more police, 80% of them say, yay, okay, it is a good thing. It's like, I'm going to give you money, I will take it. I will give you more police, I will take it. And that's what happened in this case. We can talk about a little bit about what is actually happening at the city in a moment, but that was the premise there. The premise of S was fascinating to me, okay, because on the surface it seems nobody in America gives up their sovereign immunity, okay? Nobody. I mean, this is the first time it's been done, and basically citizens were saying, we want to be able to sue the city. And by the way, there are a lot of pissed off citizens. As mayor, I knew it. And there are people that are mad and do it. What surprised me is they translated that as saying, that sounds like a really good idea. I'd like to sue the city. And so it passed. So the amendments were well written, okay? And everybody understood them, and people are saying, let's sue the city and let's bring in more police officers. I will come back to the first thing I said, which I think the council and the mayor right now, or over the last 4 years, created an environment that people felt this was the only way to deal with this issue. They couldn't work it through their representative government, and that's what got us into this conundrum. Just to break down the vote, in the North, people declined these things, voted no against them, but in the South, they voted for them and passed both S and U, and the balance of it, ergo, it passed overall. So I believe that it's something that we should be learning from as a city. I've reached out to the hero folks, the people that supported this. In fact, told them we were going to be doing this and said, do you want to join us or anything? They passed. They said they're going to be stepping back, that they have accomplished what they wanted to accomplish. And I understand their modus there. I just don't believe personally that's the way you run a city. It's more like California. California does this where you can pass amendments and create law that are direct democracy based on the state of Texas will not allow us to do that. It has to pass the legislature before it comes to the citizens. And so it's a bit ironic to me that it's okay to go right to the citizens on some things and not through representative government. So while I agree with some of the premises I don't agree with the suing the city part, but definitely in the public safety, I agree on that. I think this is not a healthy way to move about our city.
Thank you, Mike. What effect do you think that should the lawsuit go forward and the waiver of immunity be declared valid? What effect is this going to have on future city budgets, and what areas might be more underfunded?
I think the question is, did this change the way? Hey, excuse me, can we not do the messages in real time, because I'm trying to be respectful. I'd see the messages and then I'm reacting and stuff like that. So if we can not make this an all swim at this point, we can turn that into a later. I'd appreciate it. Anyway, as I said, the question is, was there a problem? Have we done anything about it? Furthermore, what will be the future if immunity happens? Okay, let's take the last part. I think my sense is if it happens, you're going to turn us into California. Okay, it's going to be much more. Let's put charter amendments on, good or bad. And I've got some ideas from charter amendments. We can talk about those as well. And that's what's going to create how we approach this city. And that means that I think there's going to be less accountability at the city council level, and they're not going to be as responsive to individual neighborhoods and citizens, but it'll be focused on the politics of getting things passed in the charter. Now, some people may say that's a better way to run the city. You can argue that point, but I think you're going to start to dial that up if those things pass. Crime overall has been coming down at a faster rate in Dallas than across the nation, and so people that look at crime itself understand that there are national waves in and out of this stuff. Dallas has historically been a better performer than cities across the United States. And there is a direct correlation to having more police officers and crime being down. So I think more police officers are good. In this process, we were when I was there, and since that point, advocating for the council and for the mayor and the city manager. I think everybody wanted to hire as many police officers as possible. Because of the pension fund conundrum and the deal that was made 20-some years ago, 25 years ago, we have lost a lot of police officers because we just couldn't afford what the deal that was cut. And so some police officers took the chips off the table and left. So we had a lot of folks leave. So the question is, can you just double everybody's salary and hire those? Potentially, okay? You can't hire them at the rate that I think the Attorney General wanted and 𝐏𝐿 wanted. You just can't train them and get them hired and get them on the street that quick in a realistic fashion. I guess if Elon Musk came in and we gave everybody bonuses and put them on the streets, like we've done with ICE agents, I think you could, but that's not the way. Then you're going to have issues on other things because people's rights could be hurt if everything's not going to be done exactly to the way it should be done. So I don't think it's changed that much, the policy. Okay. I think everybody was serious about getting more police. They've done it. What really was at the core of this issue was not a broad a police issue, even though everybody wants more police, but what was happening downtown, specifically south of Ross. Okay. And they believe there were too many homeless people in the street, and we needed police to clean up those areas, and that was what was causing an issue with some of the vacant buildings and the like. I think there was a tactical mistake that some of the chiefs before Chief Como made. They were putting them in the police in our hot spots and not downtown. The community has spoken in a broader way, not just through this charter amendments, but really on the street level, and they've changed that so it's being heavied up now downtown, and crime continues to go down. We've got to deal with the homeless issue. The homeless issue is serious, but when you get this, really boil it down, it's getting a lot better. By the way, we're getting so many homeless people housed. The big issue is some of the mentally ill, and because the state government funded a UT Southwestern psychiatric hospital that opens up in July, you're going to be able to move that. There's some legal issues about people's rights there that have got to be worked through the DA's office. But once those things get resolved, there's about 20-25 individuals that are just chronically homeless and really have some terrible mental disorders that need to have that sort of treatment. And I think that will help. So there's little pieces and parts, but that was the ignition of this thing that happened, and the citizens kind of bought into it. Long-winded answer to your question. Sorry.
No, thank you. And I'm glad you touched on the homeless. I was going to ask you about that. The Hero website seems to place a lot of emphasis on crime by the homeless or just the presence of the homeless. I wanted to ask you, did you get the sense as the campaign developed that the proponents of this were more interested in sort of quicker response times, or just a decrease in the crime rate, as you mentioned, or just a greater police presence? Exactly what do you think they were getting at?
Probably the second and third. Okay. Look, let's just be honest. You can show people all the facts in the world. Okay. But if they don't feel safe, okay, and they see someone on the street corner who has vomited and is in terrible shape, people don't feel safe. Okay. Now, that person didn't create a crime per se. Okay. But it is seen as high crime. And so I think it was the perception. And then there were some bad real estate deals that were done, Russ. And some of those buildings were bought and levered highly. Okay. And as the residents, as the building's revenues dropped off, everybody was saying this is what was happening. In fact, the truth of the matter is downtown, when I first became mayor, I think we had like 1,500 residents downtown, and now we're over 15,000. So more and more people are coming down there. And I think that's what caused it a little bit, which I think is good. It's healthy. People want to live downtown. They don't want to have to deal with some of these issues from a perception standpoint. And it creates a domino effect, and something like this ultimately happens. When
we were planning this program, the the city hadn't responded. The Ken Paxton and the resident suit against the city had been pending for quite a while. I was just curious, and this is maybe a question for both of you. Given the number of people who voted both for and against the charter amendments, and the people who seem to feel very passionate about these issues, why has this not yet turned up in the news media, unless I missed it?
Well, from my end, it's because of all the hot things that are happening in the city of Dallas right now. We've got basically 2 reporters down there. Okay. It's a matter we can't get the drive-through moving fast enough. Okay. At the morning news. And, you know, TV reporting is basically they read the morning news and then follow up on this. So no one has picked up this story and asked for it. The second thing is, lawyers, as you know, by their training in nature, for the most part, are not PR hungry people. They don't send stuff out and say, look, this is how I'm feeling. And the city legal staff definitely doesn't do that. They're professional, and they just want to get the work out and does that. It'll be a day or two, and finally someone will see that. But the question, it comes back to this, how the city works, to me, Russ. It's a great point. It's like, who is going to speak up for the city? Okay. You know, because our chief legal counsel at the city is not, she can speak to the issue, but she's not looking to get on the Sunday morning talk shows about this. So how do you create a narrative where citizens hear someone that is listening to them and responding to it, creating that dialogue? Because the way our city government is formed, it's very, very confusing for people. They don't feel like anybody's got accountability, and there's not a dialogue. So it just creates more angst when they see that homeless person in the street. The city is obviously not responding, and so we've got to improve that dialogue.
Super, thank you. Will, any thoughts?
Yeah, and I think, you know, to a point Mike raised in terms of the publicity, I think when the lawsuit was filed, I believe the AG, the Attorney General's office, released a press release and attached the complaint there. But when the city's answer was filed this past week, I don't think there was a similar press release guiding it. So maybe just a different approach in terms of the publicity of a suit. And, you know, the answer here to kind of my earlier comment about the 2 propositions, one being maybe more just kind of a legalistic legal mechanics, the other being more practical in terms of the budget implications. The city's answer is very focused on kind of the legal mechanics. It's about the immunity and jurisdiction and standing here. So you know, both political in nature, but maybe one is a little more one's a little more catchy. If it was more of a response just about, you know, the merits of Proposition S or U, that might have gotten more attention. But this was really just a filing saying, you know, this is a matter of jurisdiction and why the suit can't proceed.
Yeah, it really comes back to my first point that I was saying. The other narrative that's happening is these culture wars that are taking place in our society, and especially, and there's a grand Shakespearean, I hope it's a comedy and not a tragedy, taking place where the cities are the woke drunkard, and the states are the reasonable, you know, governance, and the 2 are having a tough time getting together. So let's get the word out. And I don't think we should be defensive about who we are. I think Dallas overall is generally a pretty moderate, centrist city. I've seen the polling. I think that the individuals in the city feel that way. They don't really have time for a lot of this culture stuff. They want basics to be done and done well. On the other hand, we need to be clear about how we're governing. And Russ, I'll call right now for a charter amendment that fixes how the city government works. It's not effective. It may have been effective 80, 90 years ago, but we need to change that. And I ask anybody that would love to get involved in that process to give me a ring, and we can talk about it. There's a lot of people on a lot of different sides that believe that this is a symptom of a bigger issue that our city fathers and mothers have not dealt with correctly.
Well, thank you. Just make sure I understand that. And for the benefit of the audience, are you suggesting that the city not have sort of the voter initiative and referendum, so we would be more in line with the way the state is, where it has to go through a legislative body before it can go to the voters?
Well, that's one idea. That wasn't what I was suggesting. What I was
Oh,
suggesting is you do a more fundamental sense and say, what is the role of the mayor? What is the role of the city council people? What is the role of a city manager, a city administrator? Who hires whom? Who's accountable to whom? How do you create a vision? How do you stay on a budget? Make sure that you're not spending too much money in your bond election. And we don't have the checks and balances that even our state has. To get something through our state, you've got to get a lot of people lined up. And we have a little bit of, a little bit, it's a hell of a lot of chaos every time. And this goes back before me. When Mayor Leopard was there and Mayor Miller was there. And we've got to be careful about how we do that, okay? Because everybody needs to be part of this process and feel like they're represented. But what I'm sensing and what I know, by the facts, is citizens do not believe anyone is accountable to them right now. Okay, there's a staff person someplace in an organization that returns their phone calls, but there's not a real sense of accountability and ownership of decisions that are made.
I got it. Thank you. This is a little off topic, but if I'm remembering right, and correct me if I'm wrong, you and other folks were trying to get municipal elections moved to coincide with general elections as a way to increase turnout. Would that be a way to get more accountability?
We were, and we did. It was done. Okay, in that charter amendment process, we put the citizens to free up and not have to do it in May, not have to do the elections in May, because no one knows when the elections are, okay? And the turnout is the lowest of any place in the United States as far as large cities are concerned, okay? And has fundamentally to do in May, because it's in May. We have changed that. The state gave us permission to do it. Once again, you kind of had to go to the state for that. The city council approved it. And so the next municipal election for mayor and city council people will be a year from November now. So it'll move from May to November. What does that do? Well, why does that make a difference? Just turnout is better. Turnout is higher. And you can't be elected with 400 votes in your district. I mean, you're 1/15 of billions of dollars spending, and very few people elect those individuals. And so I think the bell curve of folks that represent the city will be better if we get a higher turnout. And I think that's what you're going to see.
Super. Thank you. Well, thanks for your work on that, and hopefully it'll have the intended effect and increase accountability. As Will pointed out, the Proposition S was not specific to the city's compliance or non-compliance with police funding. So that it seems to me it kind of raises the question of the city, I'm sure, despite its best efforts, is out of compliance in all sorts of things with its charter. So my question, and I guess it's really for both of you to the extent you feel comfortable answering, is why haven't in the ensuing months since November 2024, there have been more lawsuits against the city? I mean, obviously now that the city has answered and said that the waiver of immunity is invalid, maybe that's going to give people hitting the pause button. But in the months between November and last week, Why didn't more people sue the city for whatever their particular grievance was?
Well, you go first and I'll jump in.
Sure. So I think, Russ, you're raising an interesting point. The Proposition S, the way it's structured, kind of has three almost, accelerants, the way I would think about it, Kindle, for more lawsuits. The breadth of enforceable universe. So you've got the charter, any city ordinance or state law. You have standing, any Dallas resident would have standing under that, and then fee shifting. So if you think you're going to win, your attorney's fees are now covered. If you actually win. And then there's one kind of de-accelerant, which we didn't quite touch on, but the resident has to provide notice to the city, I think 60 days before they actually file the complaint. So the city would have a chance to kind of moot any suit or say, oh, we've addressed it. Now the harm that you're alleging is gone. So that's kind of one, you could think of it as breaks for the city to be able to tap the brakes. So 60 days is not necessarily a long period of time to address everything, certainly if you got a tidal wave. But I think that there's probably something to this of, if you're not confident you're going to win, then you're potentially bearing the attorney's fees cost. You're not going to shift those onto the city. And even if you were an attorney who was looking at this as, if I'm confident I can win here and get declaratory relief, what's the value of those fees going to be on, how many suits are you going to be able to bring it, to which point it becomes like a economic break-even discussion. And lastly, I think that there probably just needed to be some initial weather balloon, test case, which this case probably is. We've got the state AG bringing it, so you expect that it'll be well argued on both sides to really test that jurisdictional framework. And I think, depending on how it goes, I think you could see more suits follow if the kind of Proposition S framework is upheld.
Yeah, I think you hit on two of the things that I was going to say, and then I'll add one other, and that is, one is, we knew this case was going to come. That was the point of view of the city legal staff, and I think the council generally is like, they didn't believe it was legal, so let's test this in court. All right, and that weather balloon is going to be an important one. I think not only for the city of Dallas, but for cities all across the state of Texas. It's going to be really important. The second thing I was going to say was, Russ, you hit the nail on the head. I had much higher expectations of the city before I became mayor. Okay, and I was running for office and knew the city manager. And I found out that that some people were doing certain things that were just illegal. Okay. And I talked to her, and she said, Mike, in all respect, all due respect, we can't arrest everybody for doing everything that we say we're going to do. We just can't. It's mathematically impossible. And these are from little things to large things. And the budgeting process, the taxpayers, getting the taxpayer money does not ever get us to 100%. By the way, if you get 2/3 of it right, you're thinking you're doing a good job. And so it's really fundamental to this question: how perfect do you want your city government to be? And the last point, and you very politically astutely referred to it, Will, it's all about money. Okay. And if there's not enough money in it for them, okay, people aren't going to do it. I think they're going to bitch, but it takes a lot of work. It's got to be something significant for people to do that. So I'm not as surprised that there's not so much. I feared there would be more. Okay, but I'm still sitting back and waiting for the wisdom of our jurisprudence system and seeing, what's going to happen there, and then we'll deal with that. Now, the other part of this thing that you haven't touched on is repealing these. Okay, it was and I say we because I was fighting no on STNU, and we were Johnny come lately to the party. Okay. The campaign was not organized till 30 days before the election. Some bad strategies in southern Dallas, okay? And we just didn't raise enough money and get the word out of the implications, because once again, these were well written, and people want to sue the city, and they want more police. So it's like, okay, do you understand the implications of both those things in passing this? That took a little more time. So the question is the city council going to put them on the charter review? And Abbott said it can't be done, I think, until May of next year. Okay. So theoretically, you put them back on, you could get them rejected at that point and change the charter once again, or you might find that citizens love it like this.
Super, thank you. Really a question for Will. The title of this program is sort of Now What? We've talked about some of the background and the present, and of course, case of good timing, the most recent city answer late last week. But how does this go forward? Now what? I mean, is it just a clear-cut win for the city or the plaintiffs? How could this suit be settled? What is your prediction for how this goes forward?
Well, I think that, both sides are probably very interested in seeing the resolution of the jurisdictional component of this. So I would imagine that this will proceed until, I haven't talked to either side, but I would imagine that, having an answer will clear some of the fog of war, to borrow a term, as to what is the operational reality going forward. In terms of the actual merits of complying with Proposition U, again, I think that's a difficult matter potentially for a court to reach, depending on how they view it as, is this clear cut what each step entails, or is there some amount of discretion here? So it's possible that once the parties get, kind of an answer on the initial jurisdictional questions, that maybe there's some sort of settlement as to what is the city going to do to fulfill these obligations if they're upheld. But then going forward, I think there's if you get this jurisdictional hurdle, I think if the plaintiffs succeed, there probably will be more suits on other issues. It probably won't just be contained. Although Proposition U went into effect with Proposition S, I wouldn't expect it to just be contained here. And I think there was an article suggesting, where other people have raised Proposition S, the potential for it to be used in other matters.
Two things to be considered. One is the appellate process and how long that's going to take, and the political process may get in front of the appealing process. Okay. And second, we're going to have a new attorney general come November. Okay. And there may be a different point of view of a new attorney general about proceeding in this manner. I don't know. It'll be interesting to hear the conversation in the campaign about this.
Great, thank you. I think we have some time for some questions. Let's see what we have here.
Yeah, there were a couple that came up, so we'll be glad
Yeah.
to
Well, here's one. It's presented as a question form. Perhaps Dallas should be a general charter city.
Mhm.
And I guess a related question, has home rule outlived its usefulness in the city of Dallas? Mike,
Well,
I think we touched on those. Yeah.
I suggested that we do that with our school district. Okay, if anybody was around 12 years ago, and well, excuse me, just do the opposite, become a home rule school district and then make things faster. People didn't want it at that point. They wanted to be with the state. And I think it's a good question. I think that generally speaking, okay, I would bet my bottom dollar that fundamentally people want to be more home rule, and also the status quo changes it. I think the question is, how do you change that home rule process to be more responsive to issues like this? But I don't think the state was built to make policy on every little issue that we've got, and the whole legislative process would be very different.
Great, thank you. A couple of comments point out that we didn't want to receive the questions through the chat. It's not that we didn't want to receive questions and comments. We just wanted them to go through the Q&A box. So again, we've got a few more minutes. If you do have questions or comments in the form of a question, put them in the Q&A that should be available on your toolbar. Here's an additional question. Could the controversy over Dallas City Hall be addressed through Proposition S, which is the waiver of immunity? Anybody care to tackle that one? I'm not sure.
Well, I'll just tell you what I know, and I'm not a lawyer, but my business partners act like I act like one from time to time. Right now, there is not a need for a public election in regards to City Hall and/or the Mavericks. Okay. So I don't think the way they're approaching it rubs up against anything in the city charter that says it's doing it incorrectly. So it probably wouldn't be a candidate for us. I mean, there may be some fine print someplace that someone finds and approaches it that way. There will be potentially a vote at some point in regards to how do you use hot tax or rental car tax and things like this for spending. This isn't going to have anything to do with property tax, but there'll be, and that'll have to be done correctly too. And look, there's some healthy things with us. There's no question that you double check and make sure you have your belts and suspenders on every time you do something. Okay, so you don't end up in court. I just think it's not very responsive to taxpayers and taxpayers' money.
Thank you. Here's another question. It says, could the Proposition S lawsuits be required to go through mediation as other civil suits, or could the city create administrative courts that these suits do not clog up the dockets?
You know, that one's a tough one because it's not, as we've already talked about, there's not harm being done to be settled, to kind of split the baby, if you will. Will can probably answer this better. It's really it's calling balls and strikes and says, wait a minute, you said in the city charter you should do this. You're either doing it or you're not doing it. So the question really is, how do you create that? And by the way, if you ask me, because I was mayor, even in the city charter, there's conflicts all the time. And our lawyers would, I'd get a ruling on one thing and a new lawyer would come in and they would change it and say, no, it needs to be done this way. So I think you could adjudicate a lot of things in our city charter in that regards if you want to approach it. I don't know. Will, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think a fundamental point, maybe going back to Mike's, of, these propositions were well written, but to get to their aims, but they can't cover everything. They didn't, and they don't specify any sort of vehicle for that. And so to some extent, I would expect that the right forum is still going to be a Texas state court, which is where this is proceeding now. In terms of setting up a whole kind of separate court system to deal with this, I don't know that the volume will be that high. Certainly, if maybe there is some tidal wave, then you could see something like that. But there could be a system where, to the point I mentioned earlier, the claimants have to provide 60 days of notice before filing the complaint. And so you could see some sort of administrative system for intaking those, perhaps, to avoid litigation. You know, it's not true arbitration, but if, you know, an aggrieved resident had dedicated place to file that notice, maybe that sort of sets up the court alternative system in an administrative function.
Hey, I may be barring trouble here, but as you talk about what's now, what could happen, if that stayed around, I could see council people suing themselves, okay? Because there's often a disagreement about how the city charter is read, and it basically is voted down. They move it, and if they get enough votes, they can change the way it's read. But most of the time they don't. But in this case, if you're a minority and you really feel that way, you sue the city, okay, and say it should be read this way, and they're suing themselves. And it's like, really, we want to go there to how to make decisions? But think about it. I mean, I've been in meetings where someone would love to threaten a lawsuit because of lack of transparency or whatever.
Here's another question. It may be hard to answer, but it's what is the likelihood that other major Texas cities will file amicus briefs opposing Proposition S?
So I'm happy to take a first pass at that one. I would assume, you know, to the kind of comment Mike made of the appellate process, say this case works all the way up to the Texas Supreme Court. I think a fundamental issue there, something would expect to kind of be discussed in the case would be, can a city, through a charter amendment, waive its sovereign immunity, or is that a function that the Texas state legislature has to approve? And in that situation, you might see other cities maybe wanting to take the position, no, a charter amendment, you know, a voter-approved charter amendment doesn't strip us of our sovereign immunity. That has to come from the state. So you could see, and that's a scenario where I could see other cities having a vested interest in not going about Prop S as applied to Dallas, but the pure mechanics of implementing a charter amendment like Prop S in their city in the future.
Yeah, that seems to me to sort of touch on what Mike referred to as the second level in his introductory remarks. I mean, it's really sort of a state issue. If you know, similar citizens groups in other major cities around the state feel that public safety isn't what it should be and their police force isn't what it should be, then you know they'll look to Dallas on this, and maybe the cities file amicus briefs to sort of support the city of Dallas's position for some of the arguments that we've heard today.
Yeah, I will tell you, Russ, that it's not secret because everybody's been talking about it. Mayors of Republican, Democrat, whatever cities, if they've got any size to them at all, do not like the legislature telling them what they can and can't do. So at the fundamental zeitgeist that's happening here, they're definitely on the side of just pushing back a little bit of this. But I don't know how, and I think everybody's for crime reduction. It's the question is how much are we going to, as someone asked, are we going to be just kind of a direct, you know, democracy, or are we going to have representative government?
Right. Thank you. We are about out of time. I think we've got 1 minute. The continuing legal education course number for this is 174-312-714. Repeating that, 174-312-714. And Araceli Rodriguez at the Bar Association headquarters has also put that in the chat if you want to take a screenshot of it. I want to, on behalf of the Dallas Bar Association Public Forum Committee, thank our guests, our panelists, Will Altabef and Mike Rawlings. Thank you all very much. Been very informative and very helpful, and stay tuned as these lawsuits proceed and matters go. Yes, Mike.
You guys are important, okay? Torres City, make sure you get involved.
Will do. Thank you so much. With that, we stand adjourned.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.